Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hannah with Fullstory, and we're here for another edition of Fullstory Live here on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us. I'm here this afternoon with Kyle Henderson, a Senior Product Manager here at Fullstory. Thanks for being with us, Kyle.
Oh, my pleasure.
So before we get started, a few notes. As a reminder, this is a live session, so please feel free to add comments below. If you have any questions, we'll get to those later on. We're going to be talking today about OKR cycles and sprints and how those can work together. So Kyle, to kick things off, can you tell me a little bit about your background before you joined us here at Fullstory?
Certainly. So my background in product management crosses a number of different startups across the last 15, 20 years. Also spent some time working in product research and management at Nokia and some larger companies as well. But have spent a lot of time in the user experience space and the analytics space, and that was part of what attracted me to come to Fullstory. So that's the background.
And what attracted you to being a product manager?
I think because it's one of those interesting roles that is so ill-defined that you're allowed to go and get stuff done. And I just like being action first, and it just works with my personality. I don't mind making decisions and having to pull people together to get stuff done. So yeah. It works with PM.
Definitely. So we're talking about OKRs and sprints today.
Yep.
I feel like it's appropriate to make some sort of comment about you're an ultra marathoner and we're talking about sprints.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting dynamic there.
Yes, sprints are great for speed training. It allows you to get a faster pace when you do long runs, but I can't say that I was ever good on the track in high school.
Okay.
So.
All right, that's fair. So talk to me a little bit about OKRs and sprints, and it sounds like there's some tension there historically.
Yeah, so first, what is an OKR, right? So this is a management and alignment system that was popularized by Andy Grove of Intel, and it stands for Objectives and Key Results. And it's very good at helping define what the business wants to achieve, and then also saying, how do we measure that we achieved it or didn't achieve it, hence the objective and the key result. Now, those typically are kind of longer term plans. Maybe this looks at a few quarters. It could even look at an entire year, and kind of starts to play with schedules a certain amount. Where on the other side, you have kind of agile methodologies, which sprints live inside, whether you want to Scrum or some other kind of more branded agile approach. But this concept of being very flexible, responsive to your customer set, your user needs, and being able to, in a very nimble, agile fashion, execute quickly and deliver quickly to figure out what works and doesn't work. Hence the idea of sprinting to get something out the door and get feedback on it. Now, one is very flexible and responsive and doesn't have necessarily a whole lot of roadmap, while the other is very oriented towards a longer-term roadmap and planning. And often organizations find those in conflict because how do I say I'm going to get something done a year from now when I don't know what's important next week?
Yeah.
That's why there's a little bit of conflict at times, and people have to figure out how to make these two things work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So we'll talk about OKRs first, and then we'll talk about Agile. So you defined OKRs, objectives, and key results. We use those here at Fullstory, and I personally have found them to be really helpful for thinking through how do we solve big challenges in a short period of time. What do you see as the benefits of working through an OKR cycle?
So I think the first major benefit is it creates a lot of cross-organizational alignment. It tells you what the business objective you want to achieve is, and it also tells you how we're going to measure if we achieved or not. And that can flow down quite easily. So let's say like an objective is define, launch, and collect 1,000 customers for a new product, right? And I'm saying I want to be able to do that by the end of the year. Yeah. Well, a key result is 1,000 customers signed up, right? Another key result could be being able to say we released all MVP features and then additional like fast follows of some sort. Whatever you want to define it as. But what's helpful about that is you can start to see, okay, well, me as in marketing or me as in product or me as in engineering or in commercial sales, I can see like, oh, if I want to help the company be able to get 1,000 customers, I can kind of break that down and say, oh, my portion of being able to deliver against that metric is, well, I need to make a feature as an engineer, or as a product marketing, I need to create the position and the messaging around that feature to communicate value to the end customer. So it becomes easy to align to what the company wants to achieve with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think also we've talked a little bit on other LinkedIn Live sessions about our watchwords here at Fullstory. And one of those is clarity. And for me, I think OKRs are really clarifying because you do get that visibility into what's our business's priority, and then understanding how I as an individual contributor or as a team can help us track towards those goals.
Yep.
What do you see as the challenges with OKRs?
The challenges often I find with OKRs is the expectation that it drives all work versus placing importance on certain work. And often companies start with OKRs at like the highest level. So you may have OKRs only at the company level, not even like at the department level or like squad level yet. Like you don't go that low. And if you're thinking that you want to use OKRs to drive all activity, it can be then quite difficult to a certain extent because cycles become longer because you want this to be a methodology used across the entire org. And it also requires a lot more planning in advance, so you start to lose some of the flexibility you may have been used to prior to going into an OKR process.
Yeah, definitely. And you've worked under OKR structures at other companies as well, so you have lots of experience with this. Let's talk about Agile or sprints. How do you define that?
So, don't nail me to the wall too hard on this one. But let's just generally describe Agile methodologies as approaches that typically have something that looks like a backlog of requests from customers, users, commercial, et cetera, for changes or updates to a product. And the thought that on a weekly, every 2 weeks short cycle, I'm going to pick which of those requests seem to be most important, define them, develop them, and release them, and see if they are successful or not by whatever success criteria I set. The idea there is I'm going to iterate so quickly that even if I am imperfect in knowing what is the great value I can deliver, I will, through rapid feedback from my customer set and my stakeholders, be able to get to the right feature faster than if I had tried to do, like a traditional waterfall or potentially even like a longer planning cycle of some sort.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously the ability to move fast and be nimble would be a benefit. What are some other benefits you see?
Other benefits are it works really well when you want to talk about organizing work on like a daily basis or like shorter term weekly basis. So often in situations you may have squads or smaller teams or smaller departments where let's say you like range from like 3 people to like 40 people. And this can be very helpful and still very wieldy. Like you can do a very good job with managing what do we want to focus on this week, what is it specifically we want to develop and launch, and when are we going to actually put it in customers' hands. And it's very clear and well defined because you're working on these small bite-sized bits of work. And everyone knows, like, oh, at the end of the week, was I successful, or was I like 80% successful at like getting done what I said I was going to get done?
Yeah.
But like longer timelines, you can lose sight of what you're trying to accomplish, or what you're trying to accomplish can change a little bit, and it gets tough to understand and manage day-to-day work.
Yeah. So it sounds like the biggest challenge probably is having that longer perspective on what are you doing, what are you trying to accomplish, how is success measured over a longer period of time.
Right.
Got it. So obviously they sound very different. But your perspective is you think that there is a space where they can actually be complementary, correct?
Yeah, I think they actually work very well from the kind of the perspective of meeting in the middle. I think OKRs work, and from my experience, work very well when you want to talk about entire company level objectives or like department level objectives. And then more agile methodologies work quite well when you're wanting to talk about daily, weekly, every 2 week work focus projects. How do I actually get stuff out the door? Now, where I think they can meet is when you say, I don't think one should completely control or organize the company or the other. So from my perspective, and what has been very successful for me in the past, is working on quick cycles like Agile with sprints, but in every sprint we do, saying divide it. Only half of the sprint is going to be dedicated to work that is oriented towards an OKR in some way, and the other half of the work is going to be dedicated to whatever other stakeholders think is important for a quick turnaround. So that I'm getting that kind of incremental, flexible, agile responsiveness to customers in the market, but I know I'm also getting measured progress against what my bigger, longer term plan is. And this has a big impact when you want to talk about like what size company you are. Like, am I an early stage company or am I like a big enterprise? And there are pros and cons to different size companies and which methodology matches and how you should transition over time. But generally speaking, I think it's powerful when you decide to split between the two and you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes a lot of sense. If we think of, we talk a lot about OKRs here as being big boulders that we want to chip away at, large projects, and you're saying that the sprints could be sort of the smaller pieces that fill in around it.
There's an analogy, if you guys are SpaceX fans or like any of these companies that are making microsatellites, this is really intriguing to me. I'm going to nerd out on this. But these constellations of microsatellites are awesome now. Like they're getting fired up into the low Earth atmosphere and they're taking photos of the entire Earth every single day now. And the only reason they're up there is like when SpaceX launches like a massive satellite with a big payload, there's a lot of empty space that can't be filled with heavyweight stuff. But these microsatellites are like shoebox size and they're getting shoved in everywhere. So think of it as like big efforts of work can get like major boulders chipped away, which are like getting the big satellite up there. But then there should be like lots of little like ride-alongs along the way, which are like pushing the ball forward across the entire landscape.
If you're thinking in terms of product prioritization, I think a lot of organizations at one point or another struggle with tech debt, where they have sort of that just like lingering issues that they're chipping away at. They're not necessarily big projects, but they may have smaller sort of initiatives that always need to be a focus. How do you think that fits into this framework that you're describing?
So my specific experience on that from the PM perspective, having worked with engineering managers in different squads, we would usually say when we got to sprint planning each week, we would say, I as the product manager am going to take 50% of the points and I'm choosing to divvy up half of that towards some of my big OKR stuff. And I have a lot of little small things I want to bring that are product oriented, maybe slight tweaks to features that I'm going to fill in. Now engineering, you own 50% of the sprint. What do you want to bring? What's important to you? What are your projects, your epics, or your small things, your tech debt? And then we all bring it together, and if it's more than 100%, we start negotiating back and forth and like what's the value doing what.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
So there's always space.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from those of you who are watching online if you have any thoughts about OKRs and what works or doesn't work with them, or if you've worked in sort of this dual framework that Kyle is describing. We'd love to know your thoughts and questions. So it sounds like there's a lot of benefits from working with both OKRs and sort of a sprint or agile approach. Certainly there are challenges as well. Yeah. Can you describe some of those for us?
So often challenges around sprinting and more agile approaches. It happens so quickly and so many little things can get done, it becomes difficult to create visibility for the rest of the org about like what's shipping, what went out to production, like what problems got fixed. It's like unless someone like customer support is specifically watching an issue, they may not know it got resolved. So that's a challenge because there's just so much little stuff happening all the time. A challenge on the OKR side is that unless something is like really called out as like a big meaningful project that's going to push the business forward, it doesn't necessarily get the spotlight and doesn't necessarily get the also like a visibility and awareness. So like you could have like medium or smaller size projects that might have a big impact, but because they didn't get called out in some special way, they kind of fell out of the scope and the area of awareness for the rest of the org as well. Any other questions on that part?
I mean, I think for me, that last point is really interesting because we talked with Justin Dealey a couple weeks ago about working cross-functionally. And part of that is helping the people feel like they are having a valuable contribution. And so if you are having smaller projects or things that aren't being called out in an OKR spreadsheet or being celebrated as wins, it can be challenging to motivate people. How do you deal with that as a PM?
So this might be going into a separate topic for a completely separate live session, but I have found using this tool called, and it comes from the agile space to a certain extent of like focusing on like epics and understanding roadmaps in two different ways. There's like the business objective roadmap and themes you want to accomplish. And then there's like the epics of work that have to get done. And those are more like all these major projects. So by giving like visibility and keeping like your release schedule more oriented towards these large arcs of work and being able to attach certain people to it, it gives you that kind of medium level visibility where tracking these epics lets me call out people as good job, you did great work here.
Yeah.
It's not something that's necessarily going to get called out at an entire company meeting, but like in a department meeting, we'll call that out. And then at like the lowest sprint level, you still get that weekly planning meeting where you do or at the end of the week when you do a debrief on how the sprint went, where you can do call outs as well. So you have like a small, medium, and large space that you can always be giving the little pause for.
Yeah, definitely. I know that as we've grown at Fullstory, the way in which we've done OKRs has evolved as well. And I'm sure that the approach that you're describing, there's also an evolution that happens with growth. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've done a number of small startups from the first few people all the way up to several hundred people now, and then worked at really large organizations, tens of thousands of people. And often you'll find seed stage, earliest stage startups are very naturally kind of like on the agile side.
Yeah.
You'll have a founder who has a product vision, already maybe has ideas in their mind's eye of like how the product is used and how it works, and it's very like feature oriented from the beginning. And that early stage company isn't thinking about the business objective other than make this feature and find someone who wants to pay for it. And that's great at the beginning when you're trying to like start building a foundation, start finding some customers to learn from. But let's say you've had some success, like you've signed up 100 or 1,000 customers over like a year or two. You're now getting in a situation where you need to actually be doing like more business planning. You need to be doing more objective setting and communications about how your business is going to grow, because you now have investors involved. You now have much larger customers who are asking about your roadmap and what are you planning on doing. And this is where you start to have a need for things like OKRs. When I need to project out farther what we're going to be focusing on, what we're going to try and deliver for our customers. And by deliver, I don't mean features. I mean like what new business processes that are valuable do we want to unlock. So like at Fullstory, we want to make it so like when you use Fullstory as a customer, you understand the complete user experience and all the measurement around that. And like I didn't tell you what feature that was, but saying that's something I want to deliver, something like once you get to be a bigger organization, you need to start setting these bigger objectives. So as you grow, you need more and more OKR-like stuff, but you also don't want to lose the quick agile approach that can really stay at the small team level.
Yeah, and you've talked a little bit about squads.
Yeah.
It seems like that's an important part of this, is having a small, closely connected group of people who are working towards a similar project or problem, right?
Yeah, and squads from like an organization perspective of maybe it's 10 people or less. There's someone who's the product representative, there's someone who's an engineering representative, there's maybe, depending on what they want to focus on, design. And it's just, it's making sure that the roles are represented to be able to do successful agile sprints. So that you have the input from product needs, you have the input from engineering potential and limitations, and you also have the input in terms of like design and experience you want to support. And making it so that's like its own little entity is helpful because it can get stuff done without having to rely on other parts of the org as much.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's say people who are watching, they're sold, they're like, this seems like a great idea. How do you recommend people get started?
If you're small, just start with Agile. And I'd say once you get up to like 30 or 40 people, start thinking about like, I want to set company level OKRs quarterly and just be like, pick only like 2 to 3 and just get started that way. And create that alignment across everyone so that anyone, while they're working on that daily basis or like weekly sprint basis, can say, is this value to the company? Can say, does it support our objective or KR? And understand that as a prioritizing power versus just, I picked it because I think it's best. And
then what about people who are maybe working within an OKR structure already and they're like, ooh, this agile thing sounds like it could be really useful. How might you go about creating buy-in for that at an organization?
Yeah, so sometimes I think it's more simple to not try and start by getting buy-in into the methodology, but start by just simply providing a few tools or processes for organizing weekly work.
Yeah.
So like even just like coming in on like the Friday afternoon and saying like, what got done this week? What did we think we were going to get done? What do we think was successful, not successful? And being able to get that. And then asking, what do we want to accomplish next week? So that on Monday you come in and be like, hey, these are the things we said we want to accomplish.
Yeah.
That's pretty much like having your sprint Kanban and your backlog to a certain degree. And you're starting to get people to think about, how do I move stuff out the door quickly, but also say what I can get done and measure if I got it done or not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned tools and processes. Do you have any tools that you think are essential for doing this type of work?
I always encourage it to start manually. So like get the Post-it notes and put it on the wall and just say like backlog, current sprint, like QA or like release to production. Like keep it super simple at the beginning, because whenever you're trying a new process, if you can't do it when it's at its simplest, why would you expect to be able to do it at a larger scale or more complexity?
Yeah.
So grow into it. Don't try and bite off all of it at once. But then other great tools, like I love Trello or spreadsheets, Clubhouse. I mean, there's lots of tools out there that are either very flexible or very opinionated that could benefit you once you've matured your thinking on it.
I love that idea of just like starting with the most basic process. I know that for me, when I like find new tools, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to use this. And I don't often start to think of like, okay, what's the structure here that this should be in, and let's run the process before we adopt tools.
Because a lot of times you gotta find the process that works best with like let's say the chemistry or makeup of your team.
Yeah.
And so you want to understand that to help you create your requirements for what the tool you pick is.
Yeah.
So I need my process before I pick a tool versus I pick a tool, now let's work with their process.
Yeah. I think another important piece is communicating really well, either within a squad or across teams or to the whole company.
Yeah.
What tips do you have for folks around communicating?
Even if like you use like an online tool for your agile sprints, I still encourage like turn it into a physical thing, put it on a wall, make it so people just encounter it and get knowledge like by accident, like they bump into knowledge in some way. And some kind of space where you can literally see things moving.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like a digital space, because I can always like move a tab around. A physical space is very helpful. Additionally, I would say, and this is like from the product perspective, and I work with Hannah, so please don't call me a hypocrite initially, but often in product management, you end up having to talk about things 2 to 3 to 10 times more than you actually spend working on it, because so much of that work is just about communicating and getting information out to people and going collecting information. So don't feel bad ever if you feel like you got too little actually done if everyone knows about it. Because with everyone knowing about it, that means you got feedback from everyone, and what you did do is probably more on target than if you'd spent 9/10 of your time doing it and only 1/10 of your time figuring out what to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I really think that PMs and product marketing as well are sort of these nice like connective tissue roles where you spend so much time working with other people and communicating and make sure everyone's on the same page, that there are some days I go home and I'm like, did I do anything, or did I just talk to a bunch of people today? But that in and of itself is really important work if you're doing it well. Like that's critical.
Yeah. You can never underestimate the value of 2 minutes that changes someone's vector to be more on target.
Yeah.
Like that scales. Like if you could teach that, right? It makes everyone more on target.
Yeah, I think that's great. So one of the questions that we received is, how important is it that OKRs be set at a product team level versus a company level? Should they always be one and the same?
They don't have to be one and the same. And this goes back to your question of how do you get started? I think this is really dependent upon the size and complexity of your organization. And what I was saying before is, if you're small and you've never done OKRs before, just start at the company level. And then think about, if you're doing some kind of agile approach or whatever methodology you're using for planning, just think about how you organize the work to deliver on those OKRs.
Yeah.
And as you grow, bring it to the department level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate your time. Always fun to chat about OKRs and things like that. Thank you to you all for joining us, spending a little bit of your afternoon with us. Hopefully you learned something and have some ideas to take back to your team. As I mentioned, this is, I think, the third in a series of 4 LinkedIn Live sessions. So we'll be back next week with Agata Bugai. So please tune in for that. If you want more updates on product management or other content that Fullstory is producing, please follow us on our LinkedIn page. Until next time, see you later.